Alright. It is day 13. Yesterday we had a very interesting discussion about probably a little bit more detail that made me realize something that I haven't been rehearsing or practicing regarding these videos, right? And a big bulk of it dealt with trying to explain the methodology or the rationale behind the approach, which is not immediately apparent. So I'm gonna start doing this starting today, where I rehearse to myself and practice, get in practice on how to describe my approach, what is the rationale, and then through repetition and refinements, it'll become a bit more concise. So when I have to enter this conversation again, I will be far more organized in my thoughts. Yesterday we had a wonderful discussion, largely trying to compare and contrast different approaches, and I explained some concepts that came out a little bit rusty, I would say. So before we go into all of this, currently is day 13, right? And over the course of 13 days, this is the structure I've settled on due to the bigger pool that I can use now. So, hold, right? I just try to limber up a little bit. But the concept of warming up for me right now, to contextualize these sets, is that largely speaking, after resting, there's going to be a period of inactivity, right? Resting is inactivity and growth. And oftentimes when you do something for quite some time, as personally, I'm an endurance forward person, once you rest, there is often what I would call stiffness. And the stiffness is what I feel the OS community tend to refer to as rust, as in whether it's a week away, a month away, or even on a daily basis, there's de-rusting or warming up. And as an endurance trainer that wants to consistently do this very regularly, stiffness will eventually build up. And stiffness comes from the resting period. So things begin to relax up. It's kind of counterintuitive about tension. But the idea is when you're warming up, it's not necessarily about engaging and expanding your range of motion. So this was a discussion we had yesterday where stretching, the obvious proverbial conventional knowledge, stretching is wonderful in the sense that it increases blood flow. Like the theory behind it is when you stretch, it feels nice because it's engaging the body to increase blood flow to an area that has recovered and arguably probably has tightened up to a bit, right? Because of strength. However, stretching does make it feel great. It increases your range of mobility. It doesn't necessarily help you perform on the task you're about to do when you're focused on range of motion and stretching. And it also requires some stamina when you're stretching. In addition, you're trying to deliberately, intentionally increase your range of motion before a weight-bearing task. That weight-bearing task can become less efficient because you have already gone through the process of overextending for greater mobility of that range of motion. So generally speaking, when I am warming up, the rationale here is to prevent that while contracting and like lower load activation of the motion that I'm doing. So, for example, when I'm warming up, and this is usually where dexterity is not a cap. Dexterity is when you do the weight-bearing thing, or the cap thing where you're working on, right? Be it lifting more weights to increase your strength, or increase your speed, as in the dexterity of your fingers. So generally when I'm warming up, I'm aiming to do just enough to provide the activation of the motion that I'm doing so that it's safe. It drains the least amount of my stamina and endurance while engaging just enough to remove what I call the stiffness. The stiffness is the inactivity period. So to get warmed up, the goal going from 120 BPM to 150, actually we're gonna go 120 to 155, is not focus technically on dexterity. It is a component because dexterity, the foundational dexterity is no longer a challenge, right? Or an obstacle from 120 to 155 now. So I use that opportunity to really slowly, because these are slower, these are habitually slow, to just feel out my finger. So the goal is to get the specific range of motion that I have done up to this point, not to increase the range of motion, but to focus on activating what I have been able to do. So that's why it stops at 155. So warm-up is slow, literally 120, 140, 150, 155, because dexterity is not being challenged. I'm working on dexterity. And in this time, in this break, so 120, 140, 150 to 155, 155 is the capstone of where I will warm up this feeling. So it will be middle of the road accuracy, right? Because I'm not focused on dexterity. Then we get to the hybrid, where we're working on accuracy. So we're warmed up. That engagement removes the stiffness. It's in contrast, in my opinion. This is not like an expert, like biomechanics or scientific thing that I have experience with, like with an expert background. My theory or my rationale is I embrace the concept that to remove the stiffness is to add motion to the movement that you're doing. So if you were to try to de-rust, it's just the act of consciously activating your fingers, any speed, any like a really low threshold. So you're trying to use as the least amount of your stamina to get the proper activation. Then that activation removes stiffness, and that removing of stiffness prevents injury. So when you jump in not warmed, as in you haven't done the motion at all, that first couple steps it's generally the first couple, that's where you get injured. Like you get a cramp immediately, or you lock up and it sets the pace of all of your performance tasks after the warm-up. Stretching in general, in my opinion, can make you feel great, and feeling great is a great mental exercise that promotes performance too. It's not, in my opinion, a rationale for preventing injury. It might actually promote injury because you're doing a range that you're not used to yet, because stretching tends to be focused on literally stretching, which I don't know about you, but when you're doing this, when you're weight bearing and you're doing dexterity, you're not doing something that you haven't done before. So when your first idea of stretching right away, that will interfere with what you are ready to do. So usually stretching comes after the traditional conventional means of stretching. So in terms of the OS community, that type of stretching is what I'm referring to. And that is the type of stretching I don't perform. Personally, I don't perform that. The idea of warm-up is to get your hands to contract the way you already practice prior to the performance. So I do that up to 155. See if, observe if I don't feel any stiffness, right? Because the idea is you're leaning into the warm-up and it should improve over time. The stiffness should not be pronounced until you reach a point of performance task. So we're leaning in. In day 120 was rough. It was super rough. I didn't even get to the end, and that was all the warm-up I can do. So the warm-up, it was hard to demonstrate because the warm-up was the first 30 seconds of this. The warm-up was only the first 30 seconds. And now the warm-up is this, plus this, plus this, and this. At some point, I'm gonna cut this because the warm-up you don't wanna expend too much energy from your performance. That involves getting really stretchy. That actually takes away from your energy. It imposes a range of motion that you're not used to, and it often lead to underperformance. Not overall, but it saps away from your performance. Now here's what I mean. If stretching makes you feel good, that ultimately could drive it above your own performance. It doesn't mean that it's doing something mechanically, like preventing injury. Overall, if you're performing better and you're performing longer, it might seem like it's preventing injury. But I can assure you that there is a very loose data or consistent data where someone actively stretches a lot and do the same endurance training over a month, a year, 3 years for the rest of their life, it doesn't significantly prevent injury. Between someone another athlete, closely related athlete, that doesn't do that. There is no evidence, longitudinal evidence, that's strong enough to say it is significant. And it still is holding up today, where we assume that something that makes you feel good somehow translates to preventive injury. Just for the record, it's not to say that there's something that says it doesn't either, right? So just as much as me suggesting a word of caution, where the mindset, so I'm thinking more of the psychology here. So if you're stretching and you're just like, oh, I feel so good, the habit is that you're going to stretch well beyond your range of motion on weight bearing. So when you're stretching like your chest, your bench press is going to be right here somewhere. But this feels so good. What would happen when you take on weight? You're going to try to push way past your range of motion. It's going to be the range of motion you can do without weights. So the idea is, what are you more prone to injury? Well, you're going to be more prone to injury when you experiment with a higher range of motion during exertion, right? So in a way, when you're stretching, you can do it after you work out, because then you can have the safety of gaining that range of motion for the next workout after you rest from stretching. Stretching is an active process too. So when you're increasing your range of motion, it is not weight bearing. You are not bearing weight on it the same way. So the last thing you really want to do is to say, hey, my brain feels like this is normal. if you're not consciously aware that you're pushing way past your range of motion while holding like, I don't know, 400 pounds, like double your weight or something, you're going to tear something. It's gonna rip. Something is gonna give. And if it's not today, it's gonna be like the following day or the following day, where you constantly think, oh yeah, stretching. I'm gonna stretch even harder this time. Like you can do that. Not before your performance, in my opinion. That's how the psychology follows. So for me, the things that I can do very easily, no dexterity, check. Really, really low amounts of stamina drain. I need to get just enough to remind myself what the motion is. And that's it. That's warm-up. So that's the structure. From here on out, when I say I'm warming up, it's going to be... I think today we're going to cut out 120 actually and see how it works out. So we're doing 140, 150, and our new capstone 155, right? That is the warm-up. The whole focus is not necessarily accuracy. It's to engage my two fingers the way I remember it. And then we go into the hybrids, the area, our main area of focus, one of our main areas of focus, which is 160, 167, 180, and 170. This is the area where we have dexterity training. And our main performance is to generally overall gain a great dexterity. Our endurance will come from playing, right? From playing the thing. And generally speaking, this is where my dexterity training begins, because my endurance training is beyond that, which comes at the final phase. So when I get to 160, between 160 and 170, I am actively focused on improving my accuracy and timing, on tapping only. So the reason I chose this map set is it minimizes every other element except tapping timing. So here I do want to see a general uplift in accuracy, both going up and going down, because now I'm doing it in the middle of it's my performance time. This is the beginning of the exercise, not the warm-up, right? So here, naturally, each day shows one of the biggest improvements, right? Because I'm focusing improvements on accuracy, generally because that is the focus. I am not stamina capped here. It's not, the endurance is not capped here. And then once I get through this, right, going up, I need to train endurance. So there's another component that I like to, after I focus a little bit on dexterity, I want to move to endurance. The reason why I do this is I don't want to end up hyper focusing. It keeps me dynamic. It's a personal choice to make things interesting for myself. I could continue to work on precision and just eliminate the next step and continue to find more things to do. However, I'm working on two things at once, and I believe that's my sweet spot, working on two components. So after 170, we have 171 and 180. And largely this is because of interest of time. I could place one more in, like 175 or something, if I find one. So what does 170 and 171 and 180 do? And this is where yesterday's discussion came in. And I realized that I'd done a really incredibly terrible job at explaining. And the reason why one of the biggest reasons why I was doing a terrible job is because I didn't plan anything and it was difficult. So when someone when a really great person, right? It was really fun. We had a long conversation. They suggested something. My response was very muted. Like, oh, well, it's kind of hard to explain. And then I did the whole routine. I listened to myself and said, yeah, I said that because I wasn't ready to explain. And that's revealing to me that I haven't rehearsed something enough to be confident enough to lower the effort it takes for me to explain it. Over time, in the next like 4 or 5 hours, we kind of got ideas thrown back and forth to remove that. What I'm doing here is to make it more concise, and repeating it and rehearsing it helps a lot. So here, in this part, this is where that conversation started. I was doing this here in this phase. So to explain this phase is my endurance phase. So one of the central core ideas from yesterday's discussion was that tapping stamina cannot be, for this person, tapping stamina can't be separated from dexterity. So what I mean by that is, to the OS community, it would be stamina, when tapping stamina cannot be separated from accuracy. So accuracy must be high to be considered fruitful tapping stamina. So accurate stamina, those two are necessary. So if you're tapping inaccurately, it is not a component of tapping stamina, which we had a discussion, sharing what our different perspectives are, and my perspective differs. So I'm going to try to explain that here. After I've done dexterity training, which is what I would qualify and concede to that person tapping stamina. So at 167 or 160 to 170, I'm actually actively working on tapping stamina, as that person would suggest. So that's where my tapping stamina is, where I focus on accuracy and dexterity. The thing that we don't resonate with is I'm not challenging my stamina in that portion. Between 160 and 170, there's no challenge of stamina. So if I do it a lot, there isn't a stamina challenge. And what happens is I would have to spend an exponential amount of time to gain, to push myself in a manner that will gain more endurance. Because unlike that person, my cap is dexterity. That other person spend a lot of time revealing that they are a precision player. They are very accurate because they focus on accuracy. And to me, my accuracy is the cap. So I can't train stamina if I can't dexterally do something. So their perspective is that they can't train endurance until they're accurate enough. And here lies the difference. I can still do something for a very, very long time inaccurately, without injury, safely. However, to have that perspective is for someone who has more stamina than they have dexterity. That person's perspective restricts their endurance for mastery of dexterity. So what they will experience is they can go up to 220 with great accuracy, but they won't be tapping the whole time. As in, they can't just power through things because they have to be accurate about it, right? So for me, I can power through many things without creating a bad habit, right? Because I'm training endurance. It's not a component of dexterity. The things that I'm actually training to be accurate are during the times I'm training dexterity. So in my training, 160 to 170, I'm actively training dexterity. I'm training accuracy in OS terms. And then since I only push myself to 20-30% max during this period, and I don't want to spend like 3 hours wearing myself down doing accuracy training because it doesn't tire me out, right? I add what I call the burnouts, or like the extreme phase before I step down again. So the peak, my peak, as in my strongest skill set, is endurance. I know where my pain tolerance is, and I know how hard my body can respond to things, especially my hands, you know, my legs. So my skill set's peak is endurance, and this game does not favor endurance. It doesn't say like, hey, your rank is based on how many times you can tap in like, I don't know, 600 or like 60 minutes or something. There's nothing like that. It's not something that measures and corresponds well to OS. However, it's a component that I have strengthened, so I have to go one above. So when I do 171, 180, which is when this person came in, they saw me what they call mashing through the song. However, it's I might add another tool to show something, but there's a difference between mashing and actively just trying to move as quickly as possible. I no longer have the dexterity to keep up with the resolution that's required on 171 and 180, but I will need to do something to exhaust myself. So naturally, it may appear like it's irregular and I have no finger control and stuff, but that's not the point. The point is to exhaust my fingers so that I can maintain my level of endurance. And that is the goal of this. So it still improves over time. You can see that it's starting to scale up, right? What do I gain from this? Well, when you have a lot of endurance, you learn to relax. When you relax, lower dexterities get more resolute. So what I mean by that is, after I burn out from this, I step down and everything else becomes more relaxed. So I can be fast without straining. If your endurance go well beyond some place that you're not dexterous enough, as you step down, everything else becomes, the mindset becomes a lot easier. This is only specifically from the perspective of an endurance person. This is how I train. So when I'm learning a language, right? What's a good dexterity or intelligence check, right? I learn vocabulary. Then, since I have so much more mental fortitude, like more endurance, I'm going out of my way and I'm just gonna use the language that I don't really understand and just force or mash myself to make mistakes and start talking about it, using the vocabulary, regardless if I'm doing it correct or not, because it's not an intelligence check, it's an endurance check. I am actively doing something because regardless of how accurate I am, how correct I am, I'm doing the thing. It's taking advantage of what I do best, which is to do things. So how do I become better at speech? How do I sound like a Japanese person or sound like a Chinese person over time? By doing it. The act of doing it is taking advantage of your endurance. And your endurance is both physical and mental. So when I'm learning something, I first warm up. So warming up in intelligence terms, right? Just to give you an example. Warming up in intelligence term is reviewing what you already know That kind of sounds like stretching, right? Stretching and activating your thing, activating the motion that you're used to in your brain. What I do typically is I review. So reviewing means I'm not trying to stretch more, as in I'm not introducing new information. I'm trying to recall as much information as I can because I'm warming up my brain. I'm activating my neurons, the same neuronal pathways that have been set for your fingers and oaths. So I review, think about the stuff, just enough. Not like, we're not talking about complex stuff. We're reviewing in a sense of, my trick is to create memories. So review the story, which is what I'm doing exactly now. So here's an inception moment. I'm literally doing that right now, intellectually. So I'm reviewing what happened yesterday, talking about it, what I learned from it as warm-up for my brain. So it's low effort because all I have to do is recall the things I like to remember. And that's what I did. Low effort, it's warming up my brain. And then when I get to the performance, I take on the precision stuff, the stuff that requires accuracy. So this is where the peak part, right? In terms of learning a language, I would go to vocabulary, grammar, and all that. It's like, hit it hard, and then suddenly I'm like, okay, I can't keep up. The dexterity is getting too complicated. I need to now rest from the complication. I do one last step. The last step is to unapologetically try the thing and exhaust myself mentally. Because if I don't get to keep the upkeep of my endurance, my mental fortitude. So what does that look like? Saying things wrong, embarrassing myself, correcting myself, apologizing. These are all techniques that I'm really used to doing. What do you get from repeating all the techniques of making mistakes, talking, and all that? You get endurance. You learn how to take care of yourself doing all the stuff you typically do, right? Apologizing in itself is a endurance training because it's a technique that you do all the time. So then, right, we exhaust ourselves, and what is the next period? You cool down. So you cool down. Generally, intelligence-wise, I would cool down with something I know how to do. And but I can work on, right? So it's stepping down. So I will review the vocabulary I learned today. Review the vocabulary I learned today. And that will become sharper because I actually took a break from it. That's another thing to integrate. I distracted myself from intelligence training like I distracted myself from dexterity training and focused on my endurance. As I stepped down and refocused on dexterity and or intelligence, I now had a break both mentally and physically from that task. And I'm using that as a last, what I call the cool down phase, where you're cooling down past your thing. And eventually all these things, this entire structure will shift upward towards your goal. It'll continuously shift, and you can design your goal with an element in mind that hopefully when you test it with, at least for me, hopefully I test it with my approach for myself, it will get me closer to the goal. If it doesn't, I have to reform that. But the structure itself is consistent. And that's kind of the idea. So it's gonna be tough because I added 3 components and something is falling by the wayside because triples, I had to start developing the foundations for the triples, right? And that's stacking twice as much. And this is a slower process because time is it's 2 different disciplines. And that's kind of how you build up, in my opinion. That's what I do. So just as a way to comprehensively I'm making this and then I'm gonna like make a video out of it, right? So that I can rehearse and see how much it changed over time. What would be an analogy of exercising dexterity for language? I'm not really sure what that means. Instead of forcing yourself to do, just keep learning new words, or like in a fighting game you keep learning new inputs or refining your ways, you know. And dexterity training is often about execution. So the intelligence component is kind of for language. The intelligence component is what you're actively part of the dexterity. However, dexterity component can also be how well you react to things. So like your fluidity. You could say, how do you practice vocabulary that isn't intelligence? Speaking the vocabulary over and over again. So a form of dexterity training would be how well you enunciate or use tonal language. So if I said "so deska" a bunch of times, and then "so deska" the next day, and then the next day, it may become more and more practiced, right? If you're working on how to pronounce things, it's a combination of dexterity training and intelligence training. No matter how intelligent you are, as in how much information or vocabulary you take in, if you don't practice saying the things, you can't speak the things. It's a dexterity component. So that would be a way. Generally speaking, when you listen to something, that's also a dexterity training, because perception is part of listening. That's well. So a lot of your senses when doing language, to me, comes from actually endurance. So what I mean by that is the whole dexterity phase of learning language, for me personally, comes at the expense of my endurance. And endurance and dexterity is always generally coupled. Endurance is like the end game for me. So the reference, most of my training centers around taking advantage of endurance. That's not true for lots of people, so you have to take into account what is your strength. So I'm playing to my strength. My dexterity training when it comes to learning language is the final phase, where I'm actively using the language. And when you have to actively use the language, you have to speak it. I still do that during the training phase. So when I'm learning vocabulary, I'm saying them out loud all the time. So in the language, I don't just read vocabulary. I see, hear, and speak. When you see, it's a different component of dexterity, because how fast can you recognize the word, right? And dexterity training for the brain, I like to call it the intelligence component, but how fast you recognize the word. And also, when you're listening, so if you hear the word play back, right? When I'm gonna learn language, I'm gonna try to listen to the word too. So someone is gonna pronounce the word, and I'm gonna take time to listen to it. That's a component of dexterity and intelligence. They're both like kind of linked in this case. And then I'll speak it. I'll say it to myself. So when I'm playing like Japanese video games and stuff, I'm actually mimicking the words. So there are words that have dexterity for, but not enough intelligence for, right? So intelligence to me is my strong suit as well. Like, I'm not a very dexterous person. However, I know a lot about a lot of things, and it's a compensation. So what I'm saying is, understanding things don't necessarily translate to dexterity either. Dexterity is about necessarily executing. So in language, I lack dexterity in Japanese and Spanish even. So I'm very intelligent in Spanish. So if you give me enough time, I can read the Spanish passage, like whatever you write down. I can't speak, contextualize, and hear things very well, like, because if you're thinking about D&D, right, what is dexterity? It's perception. So when you do a perception check, it's kind of dexterity bound. So things like, oh yeah, you heard the rustling of the leaves, and that's why you're going to do a dexterity check to see if you're going to get ambushed. So that's kind of the language analog to dexterity. And the most of the time I do dexterity is throughout, really. When I read a vocabulary, I want to hear it, I want to see the word, and I also want to speak it. So in the future, you'll probably hear me say, like, so I'm gonna see, say the Japanese, I'm gonna see the katakana or hiragana, I don't know which one it is, but the character, I'll see the romanji, right? Oh no, romaji? The, you know, like the English version, the phonetical version associated with the character, hear someone say it to me, and then I'm gonna repeat it. Back and forth. Over and over again. Constantly. During the Dex Intelligence, the workout, the main workout that I'm building for precision and accuracy, like in OS, I'm gonna be really wired because I'm warmed up and I'm gonna do that. The moment I see a dip, like I'm sacrificing that, right? I feel tired in speaking or tired of, I'm losing my focus. I enter my endurance segment, because generally speaking for myself, I'm still not tired. Like I'm not tired of repetition or doing something, like my stamina is not gone. My focus has disappeared. And that is a component of endurance. However, you can still train a lot of parts of endurance that isn't precision based. For example, you can talk very intelligently for a really long time, and then eventually you're like, yeah, I just want to vibe and chill. Your endurance is kicking in. You still want to do something, but you want to not do the complexity part. And that's endurance training. And to me, when someone says, oh yeah, you're just smashing through and you're struggling, or you're finger locking at 171 and 180, if I had to relate to those people, the whole point is, it doesn't matter if it's finger locks or smashing or anything. What I'm trying to do is, what I have been describing not very well, is I just want to keep my fingers moving. Because my fingers can still move. It just doesn't move very controlled. Because my dex is gone. It's beyond my dexterity training. I can't keep 171 or 180. However, eventually it's going to happen regardless. So I'm squeezing my endurance to get just a little bit more of everything else. Endurance is the basis of everything you do, in my opinion. It is the foundation, and not many people have that, in my opinion, because they choose to favor others. So where this person gains an appearance of always being accurate, right? I don't. I go through periods of accuracy, maybe, periods of fatigue, periods of it's using my endurance to my advantage. So what does that mean when one of the central themes of what I'm saying yesterday is, sure, okay, so you have a lot of endurance. How can you use that to your advantage? Like what are things that you're foregoing if you're always saying, oh yeah, if you want to do something, you got to do it right. You know, what do I say to that other person that I'm gaining that they don't? I am adaptable. I'm less stringent. I have way more skill sets. But they're not as great as the one skill set. Like, I'm not going to be as proficient as the one skill set and the very specific condition you have. So the conversation, the key word that comes up all the time is, well, it varies. Well, it depends. Well, I need to do this in order for it to count. An endurance person, it doesn't matter. You just do. All the time. It's just, you do it until you're tired. If you're going to play 4 games, 14 games, 100 games, you have to get to a point where you're tired. And it is very, very hard for me. It's one of the things that ruins my sleep, right? I can't wind down a lot of times. So my goal in my life to keep myself consistent is to get to a point of exhaustion. So I keep taking on new workloads. I'm not getting really good at any particular thing, for sure. However, my perspective, which is what I was sharing yesterday, is that I'm worldly. I have to be worldly to take on too much. For a person like that, underperforming in accuracy is enough to drain them of all their energy, of all their endurance. So in the end, I will outlast them. I won't get like more accurate or better than them by the things that they value. There's no possible way. Not even if I try to focus on that, I can't become them. It's really difficult, because as an endurance person, the things you work on will become less and less engaging over time. If your endurance is really high, things become boring very quickly. And boring requires dynamics. And when you're becoming dynamic, it's inconsistent. The whole drawback of someone who has a high endurance is that I need to realize it's very human to get bored when it takes so long for you to get tired of doing something. For example, what stops me from doing a lot of things? My physical limitations. I would sacrifice sleep if I didn't have to sleep. So those are my toughest challenges. My toughest challenge is getting tired regularly, resting well, so now it comes full circle. When someone talks to me about rest, stretch, and all that stuff, it's really near and dear to my heart, because I have to learn these things all the time. Otherwise, I'll injure myself. I will push myself too hard, and I'm straying away from challenges. For example, yesterday is one of the biggest discussions about, do you love challenges? There was a time in my life that I absolutely love challenges. The reason why I love challenges, the biggest reason, is that those challenges get me exhausted. Like, when I was growing up, I avoided challenges, which is what most young people do. They avoid challenges. And I was trying to speak to this person as an older person to a younger person, that if you're constantly looking for ways to make things more approachable, then you're not a person who loves challenges. Generally speaking, a symptom of someone who loves challenges is, yes, they are always at risk. They take risks. They're prone to injury. They can improve, like the trade-off is they can improve by leaps and bounds. They can also fail, like really, really terribly. Those are individuals who truly love challenges. And I was one of them before. And it was not sustainable. Like, I kept taking on more things. Like, my challenge was I needed to challenge my endurance, right? So how much I could handle. And I was reckless. I just took on so many things, and I failed gloriously. And it was not sustainable. So this person, though, wanted to be consistent. They want to be consistently improving. They keep finding new ways, but related ways. So they're not stretching out too far. They're just putting comfort zone and consistently improving. That is someone, when you tell me that you love challenges, that is someone that doesn't love challenges. The whole strength of your approach is to stray away from challenges. It still can be challenging to you, but it's not necessarily a love of it, because your entire mindset is to stay away from it. When you're playing safe, when you're only doing things that are achievable, that's making sure you don't get challenged, right? It's to reduce it. It's still challenging, just the mindset is not the same. It's great that you do that, and now I do that too. So what does the challenge look like here? Well, we met someone like that actually 4 days ago, which integrates another part of his story to mine. Is that what does he do when he plays Oath? He just plays the hardest thing possible and then just bank it off. Like, just pick whatever hardest thing you do and go at it and slam into it. That's a person who likes challenges. What's wrong? What is the trade-off for a person who likes challenges? They're gonna get hit really, really hard by potential failure along with great improvements. And that person must be become aware of their personality, right? What are the drawbacks and stuff? So they must come up with methods to offset that. So what happens when you get a big failure as a challenge lover? Find ways to bring you back up really, really fast. A lot of times it'd be like having a cheat day. Like, for example, if you're if you're a exercise person, right? And you push yourself really hard, you just always constantly like, hey, I'm just gonna do a handstand today. So you need a regiment. You gotta make sure you're ready when you get injured. You gotta be ready mentally when you hit a wall or something. That's what awareness is. So generally speaking, if you like consistency, which is another video that we already placed, if you like consistency, you don't like challenge. You are actually trying to minimize as much challenge as possible so that you're comfortable enough to be safe. And I like that. And that's my approach now. The idea is that those things are sustainable. And I talked about the contrast between old age and like younger versus older, how their learning process changes. When you get older and older, you favor consistency more and more. The reason is your perspective has shifted. You're not only 18 years of life anymore. Your life keeps getting longer and longer. And when you get longer and longer, your perspective shifts to endurance. It shifts to doing things longer and longer periods of time. Because your perspective on how long you've done something keeps getting longer. What happens is a great trade-off is another topic we touched yesterday, which is how hard it is to switch, right? As you get older, it's going to get harder to switch. You develop more emotional investment into the things you've kept up. For me, in order for me, the problem that I have to tackle is I can't play it too safe. I must integrate things that challenge my endurance. So it will create friction with those who are getting older and trying to create consistency, right? So there's a huge balance and it gets really complicated over time when you keep adding the layers and investigating. The idea is peel back the layers as much as you can and find enough clarity for you to have a sustainable thing. So if you're constantly in a place where like, oh, I can't see myself doing this forever, that's you gotta peel back more layers, or maybe patch it with someone else's inspiration, something to create it so that you can see yourself doing it forever. I can see myself doing this forever if this is all OSs. Like, I can see myself smashing and never injuring myself for now. And there are things that testing helps, right? If I see myself going down, I must catch myself. So have I seen myself go down doing this structure? No, not yet anyways. And it isn't a structure unique to OS. It's a structure of how I learn. This is my deconstruction of how I approach skill building as an adult. I didn't do this as a kid. Obviously, I needed my young experience in order to come to this point. But kids learn a specific way. And kids actually learn through one of the strongest components, and that's endurance. They don't learn through intelligence, dexterity. It's coupled to endurance. If a kid can stay consistent through endurance alone, like not processing if it's consistent or accurate or they're doing it right, if they have enough endurance, they will acquire the skills and refinement, because endurance leads to experience. The biggest component and advantage of an endurance mind is to accrue the most amount of experience. So that is my perspective. If you get a 99.9%, or if you FC, SS all these maps, it just screams to me that you have limited experience, because the time it took you to SS all those maps, I've done other things. And that's the trade-off I get. I won't SS those maps. However, I can't get to that point. SSing those maps won't exhaust me. I don't gain any more endurance. As a kid, when you can get a kid to just do things, the biggest advantage, in my opinion, to being young is your endurance. You get up, you do something, you fall down, you get back right up, because you have to gain experience. Here's a great example, which is kind of like stamina. Stamina and endurance are kind of interchangeable words in game mechanics. How to illustrate endurance? When I play an RPG game, the first thing I look for is the long game. It's the endurance game. So say it's an econ game. You're talking about like, oh yeah, character building, you need XP to build your character. You need currency to build anything. The first thing I look for is the endurance component. I'm gonna play this game, but what is the fastest way to grow? You look for endurance. It's called econ. A lot of times I use the phrase econ. So where is my bonus XP? So I don't care how good and accurate, how powerful I am up front. I'm not gonna put my points into strength, dexterity, intelligence. I'm gonna put my points into endurance or learning, or whatever the thing is called, where, like, for example, when I play Like a Dragon game, the first thing I look for is, do I get bonus XP from battles? Because I'm going to be doing a lot of battles. My endurance is really good, so it plays to my advantage. I'm going to do a lot of battles because I don't get exhausted. So the first thing I want to do is maximize the amount of XP I get from doing that. It doesn't matter how good I did it. I want to do a lot of it. And because of that strength, I will improve across the board. But not any specific thing. I don't want to be the strongest. I don't want to be the fastest. When you have endurance, you have all the XP you need to distribute your stuff. That's kind of the gamified version. So if you ever see me play an RPG, the first thing I look for is, how do I maximize the long game? If I pick like a deck builder, right? The first thing I look for is like, okay, I need to unlock cards. What's the fastest way to get the most XP to unlock all the tools first? I'm not going to use those tools. I don't have time to. I want to acquire all the tools first. And then, you know, from acquiring the tools, I kind of learn a little bit here and there. And then by the time I acquire all my tools, I'm no longer a specialist. I have so many tools, I want to use all of them. So I'm going to use all of them to some extent. And that is the build that most of my characters are always, because I want to sample everything. It works to my strength. That's only with games that I have a choice, right? So what's a big trade-off? And we'll go slightly more deeper on what the trade-off is about being an endurance person. It also means when a game forces me to do a specific skill set, I'm going to be mediocre at it. Like, I want to say I try to keep above average, like slightly above average. So the game I'm playing now involves first-person parkour. I'm kind of mediocre at it. What do I have to rely on? My endurance. So I will get it done because I'll do it long enough to get it done. Not because I will get it done well. That's not the goal. So if you can resonate with me, if you truly believe you are a person that endures, like stoicism is a great example, where you take in people's problems and you try your best to like not reflect those problems. Like a stone, a foundation person, that's me. You want to talk for 10 hours? I'm right there with you. You want to drive 24 hours to get some food? I'm there with you. The rate limiting step is not me, it's you. You have lots of skills I can take advantage of, but one skill that I excel at is I will outlast you. That's the idea. So what I can offer is that I'm ever vigilant. So when I'm in a friend situation, all my friends are incredible at specific things. Like, one's very smart, one's very fast, one's very athletic. I will be there to do all those things and take advantage of all those things, but I can't do all those things that well. What I can do is have enough time and ability to do all of them. As in, I will be there for that guy who runs a lot because I'll run with them. I just won't run as fast as them or as good as them, but I can at least run and then go over there and play a chess game with someone else. Because the thing I can do is never get tired of learning, never get tired of skill building, never get tired of just doing something in addition to something. It's a double edge. When you do too many things, you start stretching yourself thin, right? You become so mediocre. So the idea for me is my active training, the thing that I suck at, is that all the things I do, I'm trying to focus down a little bit more. So yes, I could play low star 6-hour maps to increase my precision, aim, reading skills, and tapping all at once. That's when I become overwhelmed. So I'm deliberately simplifying the way I learn, because then I won't get distracted way too often. That's something I feel the vast majority of OS players don't have a problem with. They are very great at focusing on specific tasks. They're very great at consistency because the game reinforces that. They're younger people, so they're developing a very specific skill, and that very specific skill requires a lot of focus. If you make it long enough, you're going to specialize into the skill the system provides. And that's awesome. The trade-off is they're not easily distracted. You see where I'm going with this? They're not easily distracted. So when they have a problem, they can't solve that problem. They're gonna rely on conventional knowledge that has been repeated several times instead of coming up with new solutions. Like hand stretching. That's a deep cut, but hand stretching can be misused and used. The thing is, since they're so specialized in a specific skill set, they're going to have to rely on other people's skill set to complement theirs. And that's what I'm doing. The thing that I do is to complement skills, not to specialize in skills. So what I have to do is to try to focus and compartmentalize. So it's going to look like I'm working on a very specific thing more often than not, because I'm trying to complement my endurance. If I start doing a lot of things again, it's going to become very not focused. So if I need to improve, I need to strap down and compartmentalize. With that said, and all this, summary, I have to absolutely emphasize that people are a mix of two different things, right? You can be anywhere in between, but for me, I'm quite at an extreme end. So the things I say are purely for inspiration. Unless you truly resonate with me and have come to the conclusion that the thing you can do well is that you can not get tired of doing anything, then maybe some of this stuff will be, you can take one for one. Otherwise, in my opinion, whoever plays OS that I encounter will have another 3 to 4 hour discussion about how their perspective favors specialization and my perspective favors endurance. And the reason why I didn't say generalization is because a lot of times specialization has a firm context. Specialists will only frame their things in that specific context, and it can be very difficult. And I have to speak like that and take a little stretch. So I use language because language is very relatable. Language is a universal relatable skill that even specialists, like yesterday's discussion, we did talk about language, right? Because language was their second language. And they said, it doesn't matter how difficult, whatever, I will just do it, right? And so it removes that impasse that we have in OS. As in, if you truly say you're just going to do it because of language, then both the endurance person and like a dexterity person are gonna meet, because they remove a component that makes them different. If you're just going to do, it's irrelevant if you have a lot of endurance. It's less important that if you have a lot of endurance or dexterity, because you're gonna do it no matter what. So I choose language a lot of times as a way to demonstrate, just because you're a specialist and you focus on this and you learn OS in a way, there are life skills that for me, I feel, weird flex. Here's the weird flex. If you're an endurance person, you excel at life skills. Because the large majority, I would say over 50% of life skills rely on endurance approaches. What it doesn't help you with is endurance has diminished return when it comes to like becoming an expert, becoming someone who has a very specific skill that no one can have, becoming the best athlete. That stuff, you give it up. And how do I know this as an example from my life? At least how I came to that conclusion is that I tried to become a really great scientist. Like, I tried to hang with all the brilliant people, and I couldn't sustain it. I saw my health declining, my mental state declining, and that's the stuff I work on every day. So maybe one day, a year or two down the road, I develop a way that can balance focus with being distracted. Because 90% of the time, I'm distracted. Right now, as I'm talking about this, I'm actually forcing myself not to digress into like 16 different topics. I've already done it 3 times, which went from like the age discussion to, to the language. I couldn't even keep it focused onto OS in general. But it's a digression, so I give myself a little leeway. This is like, I'm doing the reverse of what I usually do now, where I digress first, then do the thing, instead of doing the thing and then digressing. It's just a swap up, but I think it's worth recovering. So let's now cool down. Now we gotta cool down from this discussion. And when I'm talking to someone else, I do this all the time. What I do is I bring the entire discussion full circle back to the topics. So it's just gonna come full circle. And that's reviewing. So for myself, I review because I'm not actually exchanging ideas with another person, right? So what is a review? Let's go over the thing that I'm going to rehearse. I'm warming up from 120 140, or actually today I'm warming up 140, 150, 155. I'm doing accuracy, quote unquote, OSU accuracy training from 160, 167, 168 to 170. And then I'm doing stamina training 171 to 180. And then I'm doing baseline warming up for this. If this goes well, I will try to do accuracy or dexterity training here. And that's it. And then after this, I'm not going to repeat this one because it's really it has a lack of foundation right now. So then I will go back to endurance workout. So 180 to 171. It's going to be tough, right? Then I'm going to focus on dexterity again, stepping down, or accuracy. And then I'm going to cool down completely, doing 155 and stopping at 150. So that's the current routine. And in another 6 or 7 days, this is going to shift upward. And I need to find more maps because this is going to shift up to like 190 or 200. And 190-ish is actually 180 is my goal. However, I kind of want another thing just in case, right? Because I don't know. So I'm going to grab a 190 and a 200 or 195 and a 200 for the endurance training. And endurance training doesn't lead into the goal of playing maps like the feature artists that I'm going to do later. It's just there so I can tire myself out because I love endurance training. Like the one thing I can do that's the most consistent skill set is I will get it done whenever I can. So if it takes you 2 minutes to learn something, I don't care if it takes me 3 years. If I decide I'm going to do it, I have that attention span to do it. That's kind of the idea. And it also makes me very it's the reason why I would say that I'm a lot happier as an adult, right? Adults learn differently. And the idea is to take advantage of all your experiences. Adults learn the fastest as they continue to accumulate new experiences because they become more creative and creative at learning faster. If you don't get ahead of that, you don't necessarily need it, right? If your life is happy and whatnot, we talked about this. If you really want to know where you are in the process of learning, you have to ask yourself, are you saying phrases? This is where the phrase came, the discussion about age and the learning process between young and old people happened yesterday, was the perspective. If you're telling yourself, I can't pick up an instrument because it's easier and faster and better if I did it younger, then you're a person who probably, hopefully, you're very happy. You didn't need or pressure to learn strategies that make you learn and take advantage of your adult mind. You focused and stayed with how you learned the same way since you were younger. Because the 2 to 3 hours of the vast majority of yesterday's discussion was the idea that I learned very fast. I learned way faster than when I was younger. I can't even begin to explain how fast I can make something uniquely me. And that's the idea. All these are connected. I'm an endurance person. I do through experience. The more experience I collect, the more dynamic I can adjust to learning. When you get older and older, there's going to be more and more things you have to juggle. When you pick up an instrument, it's not just picking up an instrument anymore. As an older person, you're juggling everything else. So when you're playing video games, you don't learn video games the same way. I don't learn a video game by just playing the video game. It's too difficult. Like what I mean is, it's too inefficient. You have to learn a different way. You have to learn to take advantage of everything you can relate it to. Your relations are your best quality. So for example, when I'm learning how to code, I rely on Python, Perl, drawing the comparisons and contrasts of Python, Perl, R, MATLAB. I don't stay away from it. Because if you do that, you basically gimp yourself as an adult. Compartmentalizing your experience and not finding connections and translatable things, you're gonna fall behind. Because the longer you live, the more experiences you're gonna have. And the more experiences you're gonna have, the harder and harder it's gonna be to compartmentalize. And eventually you're gonna burst. The dam's gonna burst and everything's gonna be a mess. And you didn't develop any skills to help that, or even, let alone help that improve from, not just improve, but even to cope with it. Kid, you give them a skateboard, they only understand what they're going to observe with the skateboard. As an adult, when someone asks you, hey, do you want a skateboard? You're thinking about like 800, a million different things, like infinite number of things that either keep you from doing the skateboard or all the other things. How do you learn faster is how well you can manage that or take advantage of that. So for me, my flex is I do that. That is my skill set. You can't see it happening because you have to see me do things. Do I do one thing all the time? I don't. Even when I do the same thing on the surface level, it's not the same the second time. It's not the same the third time. Today is the 13th day of doing the quote-unquote the same thing, and I have yet to do the same thing the same way. Even though mechanically I'm trying my hardest to try to do the same thing, the strength and habits that I formed comes through a lot. So ultimately, what I'm recording is me trying to do the same thing, like trying to stay consistent. And the thing I'm taking advantage of is my ability to see patterns. It's my ability to basically steal everyone's experience and then make it my own. Right? How fast can an adult learn? Well, first of all, when you see me site, for example, if you go on and click on one of my deep digression videos, are you understanding it? Did you take anything from it? Did you dislike something from it? Explain how you dislike it or disagree with it. Then it led you to doing background information, and then you can communicate and compromise with my perspective. All those things are advantages that adults can do. Kids can't do that. So if you don't do that naturally, then you're still young at heart. And that's what I mean by young-minded. Your life must have been really good. Like, generally speaking, when I think of people who don't believe they need to think like me as an adult, generally speaking, they're probably really happy. They found a lot of good things early on that they don't need to cope with anymore or refine. For me, an endurance battle is ongoing. It is always a struggle for me to become bored, right? And not bored in the sense of having limited options. Bored in the sense of I feel like I can't do enough to not get bored. It's very different from the dangers of boredom digression that I had earlier about why I'm concerned about young people and boredom. Young people and boredom, that's the concern that they only care about very limited things. So their endurance and stamina are like 0 out of 10s for life. Life skills, life challenges endurance in a dynamic way. It doesn't challenge it in a consistent way. So that's the boredom I'm talking about. So when life takes away that dexterity, you have very little qualities left that keep you from like feeling hopeless, bored, stuck, right? And that's that type of boredom for me is I'm always scared one day that there isn't anything that interests me, in not the same way. Like they're not complex enough, they're not distracting enough, they're not complicated enough to be interesting. And that's what I'm scared of. They're not inconsistent enough for me. So like what I mean is if they become too consistent, as in if I see a pattern and I associate them and regulate them, it's no longer surprising. And I no longer get that glee that other people get too. The specialists, they get so excited when they get better. You know, that constant march upward, that's a change. They can see and feel the change. Boredom comes when change is not felt in that way. And for me, boredom comes in not experiencing change that I don't expect. So if I spend most of my time getting worldly and stuff, things will become dull. The world will become grayer. So in order to combat this, to cope with my potential danger of a different type of boredom, I spend all my skills and time to get people to talk to me, or get people to share things that I can't possibly know about them. So I spend most of my time and many of my skills focus on taking ideas from people. What I mean is like absorbing them. The nice thing about people is there are way more people than myself. So it's an endless source, and that's how I sustained my life up to this point. Like even when I was a kid, when I was growing up, it's always about learning about other people and what they've created. That's why I stuck in school. School was so interesting after a point because it's generally about things that I didn't make. I didn't write those textbooks. I didn't even come up with the experimental techniques that I used for my PhD. It was all inspired, and I always had a mentor. So yes, that makes me a poor leader. Maybe one day I will practice being a leader. But generally speaking, YouTube works to my advantage in a manner that like YouTube and Twitch works to my advantage as an adult far more than a kid. And you might be thinking, oh man, but kids these days, they get so good at things by watching other people do things. Like, yeah, but as an adult, I can watch people do things and then I can make it my own. A kid can't do that yet. So what I mean by that is a kid sees someone doing basketball really well, they're going to try to do that thing very well too, just like the basketball, if not better, and that was their goal. I see someone doing a basketball thing, I'd be like, alright, well, it's basketball. What can I do to make it my own? And that's the learning curve advantage of an adult. When a kid needs to play OS, right? Now we're taking it full circle. Let's review one last time. Full circle. How do you become better at OS? Well, you become better by doing the exact same thing everyone else is doing because the system has told you to do so. And if you get better at them doing the same thing, you are competing with them. An adult has a tool that the kid can never have until they grow older. I can be really good at OS because no one can compete with me. And what I mean by that is it's not even a competition. As in, I choose to do things and reinvent things, innovate things, like for myself personally, just for myself, that I'm not competing with anyone. And that in itself is the same thing as a kid competing with themselves, as in like wanting to better themselves. That's a kid that's more mature. However, the adult version of that is to always create something in your own image. a lot of adults stay young because they think being competitive is where the reward is. And that's great. If you get older and older mentally and you couldn't cope with just that, like if that works out for you, you stay there. You pretty much stay there. You stay with yourself, like evaluating other people and then doing what other people are doing and trying to be better than them, right? That's like, that usually works out all the time, like at some point. When you get even older, in my opinion, when you get to like your 60s and 70s, you eventually enter a stage of life. You can enter early, and I'm saying I did, where you enter a phase where no one can touch you. You've lived 70 years. There's no possibility that anyone can reproduce anything you've done verbatim. No one can live another 70 years. If they met you now, there are very few people, and it keeps getting smaller and smaller. So the longer you live, the likelihood of someone bumping into you and say, I can do better than your life, that's not going to happen. So I'm trying to like make it more literal so that it's easier to see, but figuratively. So I'm 36, right? I'm 36. I'm almost 37. I'm at a stage where if I see something, the whole goal of me is tell me everything about you. Tell me what you think. And I'm going to turn it into something that I can talk about. And it's going to be something that you might be thinking, oh yeah, well, that's not my idea. It's like, great. That's all I wanted to say. Like, my ideas no longer become the ideas that they spawn from, right? So the story and the discussion we had yesterday turned into this. It took me like 4 or 5 hours and a 30-minute run this morning to pretty much come up with this 1.5 hour segment that I would challenge anyone to try to replicate. And that's the idea. That's what makes a true adult learn the way an adult does. You're taking advantage of your experience. You're becoming more efficient at it. So you'll always have analogies. You'll always have stories. You can talk to hundreds of kids at once as a teacher, not just one. When you're younger, you're building. You're starting to get to know yourself. So the first person you know or try to get to know is yourself. Then you get to know 1 or 2 other people, then 3 or 4. And when you get happy, you just stop there until a challenge. For me, wrapping it all back to my greatest quality is also my bane, in my opinion, is my endurance. My endurance make it so that I have to constantly seek new sources of stimuli. And I've concluded from my life that the richest source of skill building is trying to figure out what the other person is thinking. Because I can't control it. And if things I can't control, it keeps providing that excitement. It keeps providing the thing that I'm scared of becoming bored at. I have tried to be a specialist like other people, and I got bored with myself. Like I just got tired. I'm just sick and tired of working on myself. Like, it's not interesting anymore. Like, I spend, 7 years on a PhD. The most gratifying parts of the PhD is when I'm hearing other people's ideas. Like, it's not about me presenting my work, which was a tough thing. Like, I could easily say my weakest point, and actually the point that I almost failed my PhD, is trying to figure out how to further my own research, like trying to present and sell my research and stuff. That was a weak point because it's boring to me. I get tired of things that I can create alone. So there's one unlimited resource through my lifetime, and that's the resource of others. So if someone says one word to me, it can become a 5-hour segment with 4 videos, 5 videos about something, maybe talking about that guy's feelings or someone's feelings, but they disagree, that's great. Or they agree, that's great too, right? So anything works. The idea is I'm always hyper attentive to finding inspiration of the person I'm talking about or talking to. And that was yesterday. And yeah, actually kind of the last 5 days. And now we're gonna go into the routine. I actually told someone that I was gonna be done in 2 hours, but it's gonna be looking like in 3 hours, coppers. So, alright, so we're gonna get into the routine now. This is our digression video. An hour and a half, it's pretty good. I think it was concise enough. It has a positive message. It also has a disclaimer. Hello there. I like how your name is hello there and you said hi. Hi. Alright, so gonna be less talking now because we've gone through the process. And now we're gonna see how we feel today. Alright. And this is all we're doing today because Wednesday is hump day, so we're gonna take a little break and vibe